the Sermon on the Mount. The Sermon on the Mount is the keynote address introducing the New Testament age which our Lord Jesus came to usher in. It would be an era where love would be the mainspring. It also happened that it would be an era at complete variance with any self-promoting Pharisaical ideal. Now, in his life and earthly ministry, Jesus set into motion a way of life that was completely countercultural to anything belonging to the age in which he lived. Anything in Israel, anything in the surrounding nations of Israel. The way of life that Jesus set into motion was at complete variance with them, counterculturally in opposition to them. Now, the way of life that was modeled by Jesus, modeled by his apostles and disciples in the first century, and then untold thousands of disciples of his through the ages, is as countercultural today as it was the day that Jesus initiated it. It is as countercultural today as the day when Jesus sat down on Mount Eremos and began teaching his disciples. The Beatitudes found in Matthew 5, verses 1 through 12, provide us with a description of the character traits of those who profess with their mouths and believe in their hearts all that the Holy Scriptures teach about Jesus as God's Son. It's not a part or piece thing that we can choose what we like, that we can choose what suits our fancy, or choose what we can find a way to live with. If we accept one part of the story, then we have to accept the whole story. We can't be like Jefferson, who went through his Bible, I believe it was Thomas Jefferson, and redacted everything that he didn't like and then lived according to what he did. We can't do that. Not realistically and get away with it. Listen to what was taking place there in the first century. And seeing the multitudes, Jesus went up into a mountain, and when he was set down, his disciples came unto him, and opening his mouth he taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Who are these people? And what does it mean to be poor in spirit? Let's look at that. These are they who, lowly in their own estimation, whether rich or poor, slave or free, recognized the destructive nature of human pride and chose humility instead. Let's look at the 7 capital sins. Think about the 7 capital sins for a minute. How many are familiar with those anymore? What is the first named capital sin? It's pride. Pride. And then comes covetousness, lust, and anger, gluttony, envy, and sloth. And do not think for a minute that these are just Catholic sins. I know there's more than Catholics watch and listen to these videos and podcasts. So, dear friends, don't think for a minute that the 7 capital sins, the 7 deadly sins, are merely Catholic sins. They're not. These same 7 sins will capture and destroy a Protestant just as quickly, just as easily as they will a Catholic. I remember a book that was written by Dr. Billy Graham years and years ago. I read it, must have been 30 years ago. That's a long time, showing my age. But the title of the book was The 7 Deadly Sins. And Dr. Graham talked about these same sins in the book, The 7 Deadly Sins. And by the way, if you want to read a book by Dr. Billy Graham, something from his ministry years ago, it's still available. You can find used copies of it. The really sad reality is that you don't hear much out of the mouths of Catholic priests and Protestant pastors these days about the 7 deadly sins. And that's really sad. It's a sad commentary. And it's a shame, especially considering that according to our catechisms, the capital sins are the source, they're the seedbed, if you will, from which all the other sins are engendered. Pride is an inordinate esteem that goes against the first commandment. Because by thinking too much of ourselves, we neglect God, and we fail to give the honor to Him that is due Him. We set ourselves up in God's place, making ourselves first place in our lives. That's what pride does. Consider this. Proud people live any way they want to live. They act any way they want to act. There's a line in a popular song that Paul Anka wrote. I believe it was Sinatra that made it popular, that talked about, I did it my way. And it was a very popular song. When it comes to life, there are some things that we simply do have to do our way, but never to the exclusion of doing things the way God desires for us to do them. Remember that it was pride and it was ego that Satan was overtaken by. It was pride and ego that overtook Satan and caused him to try to overthrow God in that realm where God lives, where the angels were created. Remember that it was pride, and it was their pride and their ego that Satan used to lure Adam and Eve into his captivity. You can be like God. God knows that fruit's not going to harm you, but it's going to make you like Him. It was pride and ego that Satan used in the Garden of Eden to cause the moral fall of Adam and Eve. One moment they were pure, they were innocent, they were sinless. And then in the next moment they were corrupt, guilty, sinful. Why? Because Satan, that old deluder, deluded them with his deceitfulness. And he'll do the same thing to you and me if we allow him. Proverbs 11:2 says, where pride is, there also shall be reproach. But where humility is, there is wisdom. Micah 6:8, He has shown you, O man, what is good and what the Lord requires of thee, but to do justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God. Jesus said, blessed happy are the poor in spirit. Blessed, happy are those who are humble. Blessed, happy are those who walk in and practice the virtue of humility in their daily lives. Humility has always been, it's not the cure, because we can never cure human pride. But humility is the virtue which keeps pride under control. Humility is the virtue which keeps pride from becoming something inordinate. Saint Benedict has a lot to say about humility. He says that the first step of humility is obedience. Unswerving, unhesitating obedience, according to Saint Benedict, in the rule of Saint Benedict, is the first step toward humility. And this is the first obstacle that any of us honestly have to overcome if we're going to live what Micah 6:8 says, to walk humbly with our God. We've got to do it in a spirit of humility, and we've got to overcome our pride. We've got to overcome the things in our lives that wants to insist that we're number one. And then God's way, well, it's okay out there on the periphery somewhere, as long as it doesn't encroach too closely upon what I want to do.